Welcome to our podcast, Aging is a Trip, where we take a candid but lighthearted look at all aspects of aging and retirement. You'll learn some things, you'll be intrigued, and at times you'll even be amused. I'm your host, Brad Breeding, and for the last 10 years I've been the president of MyLifeSite.net, an online company that guides people through complex senior living decisions. Now, with this podcast, I want to help elevate society's perspectives and understanding of age-related matters, past, present, and future. Now, let's enjoy the show. You're listening to part 2 of a 2-part interview with Dr. Keren Wilson, the founder of what we recognize today as the concept of assisted living.
Let's talk a little bit, again, as I said in the introduction, I know you're considered, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but from everything I've read, you're kind of considered the founder of the concept of assisted living. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started assisted living back in the early 80s?
Well, I would say that I had the first building that I built was we started building it in 1981, and we got it licensed as a living center under a special license in 1983. And then we got first Medicaid contract in 1986. And then finally, the state of Oregon passed the first assisted living rules in 1988 and opened the first licensed assisted living in the United States in 1988 with Medicaid clients. I mean, there was no such word as assisted living until about 1980. I'd say I started using that in about 1983 or 84 and developed the principles that many people consider central to the concept of assisted living. But really, it started with my mom. As you mentioned, I named the foundation I started after her because she's the one that gave me the idea. My mom had a stroke at 69. She lived in a nursing home for 10 years. All that time I was going to school, and I was the person who was responsible for her. Everyone in a nursing home has to have a responsible party. And so I listened for 10 years about what was wrong for her about living in a nursing home. Independence, autonomy, having her own space, controlling her own temperature, eating when she wanted to, going to bed when she wanted to, having her cat, all of those things which became central to the concept of assisted living. Residential environment, ability to have autonomy and independence to the degree that you want it, having support services for the things that you needed to have them for, whether it was taking your medicine or getting dressed or going to bed. So really all I did was listen really carefully to what she said was important. So she really wanted a life. And so that's why the term assisted living came to be for me, is that it was assisting her to get a life. It wasn't, what made it hard was because there wasn't a license for it. And so getting the license to do it, to have locking doors, to have people ability to have their own furniture and to have animals and all of that required a license or a different license, and getting that was the hard part. Having the idea wasn't hard. Getting officials to agree to a different category of care was the hard thing.
And that's how it is so often. The concept is one thing, but making it happen is an entirely different story. And thank goodness that you worked to make that happen and you stayed persistent with it, because I know that hundreds and thousands, maybe millions of people since then have benefited from that concept that you largely came up with, or that your mother, as you said, as you listen to her. I think I read somewhere where your mother told you, she said, just once you told her you were going into gerontology, she said, just do something to help people like me, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. And it changed the course of my life. I had planned to be a professor. And so that really set me off on a different path. And I think that it's really important to understand that a lot of the things we need to do, whether it's community building or whether it's solving a problem, if we are listening really carefully to what others are saying, it gives us insight that we can't come up with on our own. And so that's always been a guiding principle for me, is what are people saying about this? What's good about it? What's bad about it? How could it be better? Even when I was doing my first building, I had to run it because no one who had a license would run it. They were afraid their reputations would be ruined. And so I spent a lot of time talking to the staff. Why do you do it this way? What would make it easier for you? What would make it better for the residents? And so that's how I came to write so many policies about delivering services, because I really was listening to what the consumers wanted and to what the staff said would help them do a better job to have outcomes for consumers.
I absolutely love that, because I think particularly when we talk about senior living today, and again, that's a broad term, whatever category we're talking about underneath that, but I can't imagine any area where it's more important to listen to people, the residents, what's important to them, because when we think we know without actually listening, then that's where we perhaps become misguided.
Well, it's really for any business, actually. But, when you're dealing with human lives, it feels like it's pretty important to try to be responsive to their concerns and their issues. And sometimes it's such little things. For example, it used to be in nursing homes that people didn't have a choice. If the doctor ordered a diabetic diet, that's what they got to eat, no matter what, no matter if they were 94 years old and dying. That just doesn't make sense to me. As long as you have some capacity, that you can't have some choice about things that affect your day-to-day living. And it doesn't seem right that age should be automatically mean that we don't have the ability to make decisions, because we do, even when we're confused.
Absolutely. So let's talk about, how do you feel like the senior living industry has done overall managing through this situation, despite some of the really difficult or tragic situations we've seen on the news? What do you think just overall? What has been your observation, and what are the areas where you think there could be improvement?
Well, the first thing I would say is that I think it was really wrong for senior living facilities, particularly those that were licensed, to be at the bottom of the list for PP&E when we already knew that the older adults were the most vulnerable. So it made the work of facilities much harder, not being able to get what they needed to protect the residents and the staff. That's the first thing I would say. I would also say that I have been amazed at how creative the staffs of many places were in creating the capacity, using technology for the residents to communicate with their families, and being very diligent about that. That's something that will never change now. That use of technology to help families stay in touch with their loved ones. It won't just be on their birthdays anymore, I don't think. And the other thing that I think has been remarkable is that the the individuals responsible for sort of the wellness or the life enrichment aspect of people living in senior communities has been remarkable in their inventiveness to create opportunities for people to stay engaged, both physically, mentally, emotionally, with specialized programming that has helped older people even when they've had to be isolated in their units. And I think that shows the kind of creativity when given the opportunity that staff can demonstrate. And I think that won't change either. I think that all the buildings should have put up signs saying heroes work here, because they really did. I can only speak for Oregon. I can't speak for other states, but by and large, the settings in Oregon, for the overwhelming majority of them, did a remarkable job, and they're to be commended for that. And I think that's probably true in many other places as well.
Well, I think it is. I think it is true in other places. I know some of the stories that I hear, both from, we get lots of emails at our company from current residents. Some are prospective residents that follow our blog or things like that. We hear from the staff at different communities. And what I have really gathered, my observation has been that there's so much gratitude among residents at so many communities. There are a lot of really good stories out there where residents are just so grateful to be where they are and being taken care of and provided for. And as you said, some of the creative sort of enrichment programs that have really come out over these last couple of months. And I think it's been great. It's very encouraging to me. And I do believe, as you said, a lot of these things will continue and only help make things better going forward.
Well, I think we have to understand, if you're dealing with a population that has dementia, or you're dealing with a population that in a behavioral unit who have significant mental health issues or developmental issues, it's really, really hard to manage the kinds of things that help keep people safe, like mask wearing and social distance and hand washing. And it is so important for us to remember that keeping it out is the most important thing. Keeping COVID out is the most important thing that long-term care providers can do right now, because once it gets in, it is so hard to control.
Right.
So everything they do to keep it out is really critical.
And sometimes they catch a little bit of a hard time for that, but that's what they absolutely have to do to protect their residents. So you've overseen, you've been in the industry a long time. You've obviously managed and overseen lots of assisted living communities. And so one of the things that I read about occasionally is, relationships between residents at assisted living, or we may even want to say relations, maybe some things you remember or stories from over the years of just, do these kind of things really go on?
Well, of course they do. People are human. I mean, what I've found really very touching is how people develop relationships, deep friendships. They mostly never marry, but they become very, very close, both physically and emotionally. And sometimes their families are happy for them and sometimes not. And when their families are not happy, it is really, really very difficult to try to protect the interests of the residents against families who are angry and want you to keep them apart. And so you wish that families could understand that older people have the capacity to love and care about people just like people of any age. Age is not a factor in having the ability to be emotionally or physically intimate with somebody else. And so it always fascinates me when children seem to think that their parents turn into these sort of sexless things, and how they really don't. They can be like teenagers sometimes, and it's wonderful to see. So, all sorts of things happen. And for the most part, they're really wonderful things, because it's people having the opportunity to feel something for someone. And that's always a good thing in my book.
Sure. It can be life to somebody, because that feeling, whether we want to call it love or whatever that emotion is, it can really help people. It adds purpose. It adds purpose to their life. That companionship is important at any age.
That's right. And that's why pets are so important, because if you have to get up to take care of your pet, then you have a reason to get up. And the same thing is true for another human in your life. As you said, it's a reason for getting up. That's right.
I want to thank you. I am just really, again, thrilled that you decided to join us. And thank you for all of the work that you've done to help make senior living better over the last 3 decades or more. I know there's a deep gratitude among so many for what you've done. So thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another podcast episode of Aging is a Trip, brought to you by mylifesite.net.